I knew I was in trouble the moment I saw Karren Albridge stomping across my lawn, her clipboard flapping like a judge's gavel with every step. She was wearing her usual HOA uniform, oversized sunglasses, a pastel pink running suit, and an expression that could curdle milk. "Read Zeller," she shouted before even reaching my porch. "You've got 72 hours to remove that watercraft from your driveway or face a fine." I leaned against the railing, sipping my coffee. "Good morning to you too, Karren." "You mean my fishing boat? That eyesore," she snapped, jabbing her pen toward the 20-footer I'd parked beside my garage. "This neighborhood has standards, and boats aren't allowed to be visible from the street." I raised an eyebrow. "Funny, because I read the HOA bylaws. It says no commercial vessels or long-term RVs, nothing about personal boats." Karren's nostrils flared. "The board has decided to interpret it more strictly." "Ah," I said, "so you made up a rule this morning and now you're enforcing it." She ignored me. "You'll be fined $100 per day starting Friday." Then she turned and stormed off, her clipboard tucked under her arm like she just delivered a court order. I watched her go, shaking my head. Now, I've lived in the Lakeside Glen community for 10 years, bought the house myself, paid off the mortgage early. I'm a mechanic by trade, and I like simple things: quiet mornings, good coffee, and the occasional weekend on the water. That boat, I spent 3 years restoring it, and it wasn't going anywhere. Later that evening, I pulled out the HOA documents, the same ones buried in a drawer since the day I moved in. I scoured every line, no language about personal boats on private property. None. But what did catch my eye was something else entirely. Page 14. Section C. It covered community assets, including the so-called private lake at the center of the neighborhood. According to the bylaws, the lake was jointly maintained and available for recreational use by all homeowners. That gave me an idea. A petty, glorious, gasoline-fueled idea. So the next morning, I knocked on my neighbor Toby's door. He's a contractor with a pair of jet skis he never uses. Then I called a few more friends. Within 2 days, I had 8 people committed. We were going to host the first ever Lakeside Glen Jet Ski Grand Prix. I printed flyers and stuffed them in every mailbox. "Come one, come all. Jet ski race this Saturday. Family-friendly, free hot dogs and open lake access because it's our lake too." When Karren saw the flyer, she tried to shut it down the same day. She stopped me outside my garage. "You can't just throw a motorsport event on community property," she hissed. I smiled. "Actually, I can. Page 14, Section C, recreational use by all homeowners." "That includes jet skis, Karren. You're destroying the peace of the neighborhood." "Well, the bylaws say nothing about decibels," I said, climbing into my truck. "See you Saturday." She stared after me like she just swallowed a lemon whole. I could feel her brain short-circuiting behind those sunglasses, but I wasn't done yet. I had a permit coming, and a drone, and I was going to document every moment. The HOA wanted to fine me for a boat. Fine, I'd give them something worth complaining about. By Thursday, the neighborhood buzzed like a beehive someone had kicked. Families I hadn't spoken to in years waved from porches. Teenagers were asking if they could help set up cones. Even the usually grumpy guy from Lot 93 offered to bring his smoker for the cookout. Word had spread, and no one wanted to miss the spectacle, except for the HOA board. Friday morning, I opened my mailbox to find a thick envelope. Inside, a cease and desist letter printed on fancy letterhead, signed by the HOA's attorney Martin Del Vecchio, a local name I recognized from a real estate seminar I once attended. He was known for sending intimidating letters that rarely held up in court. The letter claimed the lake was under the administrative jurisdiction of the HOA and that vehicular watercraft operations were expressly prohibited during unapproved events. It also threatened civil penalties if I proceeded. I walked straight into my house and called up my cousin, Marissa. She's a municipal code enforcement officer with a knack for sniffing out nonsense in legalese. I sent her a photo of the letter. "Read," she said after a few minutes of reading. "This is smoke and mirrors. They're bluffing. There's no record of the HOA registering the lake as anything more than a jointly owned parcel, which means they can't enforce squat without a formal vote from the homeowners." I chuckled. So if they want to stop us, they'll have to take it to court. Exactly. And even then, they'd lose. Just make sure you've got liability waivers for the riders and don't charge admission. Keep it all voluntary and recreational. I hung up and started printing waivers. Later that day, while setting up lawn chairs and marking the edge of the lake with little orange flags, I spotted Karren near the clubhouse with two men in khakis. One was holding a tablet, the other had a measuring wheel. I watched them pace along the lake's edge, scribbling notes and shaking their heads. She caught me looking and turned away. That evening, Toby helped me install motion-activated lights around the boat trailer, just in case someone got any ideas overnight. We'd both seen enough games from the board to know they didn't play fair when cornered. Saturday morning arrived clear and windless. The lake glistened under the rising sun, and by 8, trucks and trailers lined the street. Jet skis of every color and size were being unloaded. I counted 11 by the time the first kids arrived with their parents. We'd set up a simple course, just a few inflatable buoys, and a start/finish line marked with hand-painted plywood signs. A grill fired up beside the clubhouse, and folding tables held coolers, chips, and stacks of paper plates. Music played from portable speakers. It felt like a block party with horsepower. Then, right as the first race began, two teenagers zipping past the boys like they were born on the water. A black SUV pulled up. Out stepped Karren, followed by Martin Del Vecchio. He was shorter than I remembered, with a comb over that defied gravity and a voice that carried like a foghorn. "Shut this down," he barked. I met him halfway across the grass, clipboard in hand. "You don't have the authority to order that," I said calmly. "This is a recreational gathering on community property. You're creating a hazard. This is reckless endangerment." "Actually," I said, flipping to the waivers, "everyone signed release forms. No one's being charged, no commerce, no restricted access. And the lake, as per the governing documents, is open to homeowner use." He sneered and motioned to Karren. "Call the sheriff." She already had her phone out. 20 minutes later, a deputy cruiser pulled up. Deputy Langston stepped out, adjusting his belt and surveying the scene. I knew him vaguely. He'd stopped by during a 4th of July cookout 2 years prior to compliment my neighbor's brisket. Karren rushed over. "Officer, you need to shut this down immediately. These people are violating HOA rules, putting lives at risk and trespassing on restricted water." Langston raised an eyebrow. "Restricted?" "Yes, this lake is private property controlled by the board." He looked at me. "Reed, you hosting this?" I nodded and handed him a copy of the HOA bylaws already flagged to page 14. He read silently, then flipped the page. After a moment, he exhaled through his nose and handed it back. "Ma'am, this says all homeowners have access. If there's no ordinance being broken and no one's charging admission, there isn't anything criminal here. Looks like a community event to me." "But he's violating the interpretation of the HOA," Langston cut her off. "Interpretations aren't laws. And unless someone's injured or asking for help, I'm not getting involved in a neighborly disagreement." Del Vecchio tried to argue, but Langston walked off mid-sentence and started chatting with a group of kids, eyeing his cruiser's lights. The second race went off without interruption. Around noon, my neighbor Jamie, who worked as a drone hobbyist and had brought his quadcopter, pulled me aside. "Hey, Reed, you're gonna want to see this." He held up his laptop, streaming the drone footage. Midway through the video, the camera focused on the two men Karren had brought the day before. They weren't measuring the lake, they were digging near the far bank, behind the maintenance shed. One of them pulled something from the soil about the size of a shoebox and handed it to the other. They both walked quickly back to Karren's car, looking over their shoulders the whole time. "You think they were burying something?" Jamie asked. "Or retrieving it," I said. I copied the footage and sent it to Marissa. She called me 10 minutes later. "Reed, get ready. That spot on the lake's edge, it's listed as utility easement under the county records. Anything buried there without a permit is illegal." By Monday, the county inspector was on site with a warrant. They dug up the patch near the maintenance shed and unearthed a rusted metal box filled with old receipts, handwritten ledgers, and what looked like undeclared cash logs. Apparently, the HOA had been collecting under the table maintenance fees from contractors for years' cash payments, in exchange for turning a blind eye to unlicensed work. The county filed charges against the HOA treasurer and suspended the board's financial authority pending an investigation. The lake stayed open, and my boat, it's still in my driveway. No fines, no threats. Just a neighborhood that remembered how to laugh again, and a suddenly very quiet Karren who now avoids eye contact every time she speed walks past my house. Tuesday morning brought the first rainfall in weeks, just a light drizzle, enough to make the porch steps slick as I stepped outside to retrieve a brown envelope propped against my door. No postage, no markings. Inside was a single typed page stapled to a grainy photo. The photo showed me standing beside the lake, clipboard in hand, pointing at the waiver table. On the page, a new accusation: willful violation of environmental regulations, unauthorized use of shared water resources, and incitement of public disorder. It was unsigned, but I didn't need a name to know who had planted it. I folded the paper carefully and set it on the kitchen counter, next to a growing pile of evidence. If they were escalating, so was I. That evening, I visited my neighbor across the street, Lydia Tran. She was a retired environmental compliance officer who'd spent 30 years auditing industrial sites for the state. I showed her the letter and the photo. "Looks like they're trying to paint you as an environmental hazard," she said, adjusting her reading glasses. "Did they ever submit a complaint to the county or water board?" "Not that I know of. If they had, I'd already have a stack of paperwork on my porch. This is amateur intimidation. But if you're serious about pushing back, we can make a few calls." By Wednesday, Lydia had connected me with an investigator from the State Department of Environmental Quality. His name was Quinn, and he showed up in a tan Ford with government plates and a folder full of satellite images. He pointed at a red outlined zone near the lake's western edge. "See this area? That's flagged as a protected runoff corridor. Any structural changes here, fencing, grading, buried utilities, require a permit, and that permit has to be posted publicly before work starts." I remembered the men with the measuring wheel. They hadn't been inspecting the lake, they'd been checking that exact zone. Quinn walked the site for over an hour, taking photos and notes. When he returned, he looked grim. "There's recent trenching along the water line, and I found PVC piping running from the clubhouse area directly into the runoff corridor. That's a direct violation. Could be connected to unpermitted drainage or illegal irrigation. Either way, it's serious." I asked him what came next. "I'll submit a formal report to the county and the State Environmental Board. If the HOA commissioned this without going through the legal channels, they're looking at multiple infractions. Fines are the least of their worries." That night, I sat on my porch and watched the clubhouse lights flicker off just after 9. Someone was still there, likely shredding documents or moving boxes. I didn't need to catch them in the act. I already had enough to pull the thread. Thursday morning, I filed a motion with the county clerk requesting a full audit of the HOA's financial records, citing the environmental violation and the discovery of unreported cash transactions. I'd never filed anything like that before, but Marissa walked me through the process. I included drone stills, the buried box photos, and Quinn's preliminary report. By Friday, a county subpoena was issued. 2 deputies and a state auditor arrived at the HOA office just before lunch. I watched from across the street as they walked inside with a dolly and came out with 6 storage boxes and 2 laptops. By noon, the neighborhood group chat was in chaos. Screenshots flew around, receipts for bogus fines, emails showing Karren had pressured contractors to pay expedited approval fees in cash, even a scanned letter where the treasurer had warned her about routing lake maintenance funds through the discretionary ledger. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't need to. That afternoon, I got a call from someone I never expected, Councilwoman Dana Rivas. She represented our district and had apparently been forwarded the audit request through the State Oversight Board. She asked if we could meet. We sat down at the local coffee shop and she got straight to the point. "You've stirred something big. We've had complaints about this HOA before, minor stuff, but nothing that stuck. This time you brought receipts. If you're willing to testify before the council's oversight committee next month, we can start proceedings to suspend their charter and appoint a temporary trustee. What does that mean for the neighborhood? For starters, it means the current board would be removed. The association would lose its independent enforcement authority until a full review is completed. You'd get a say in how things are run, and we'd help restructure the bylaws to prevent abuse. I agreed on the spot. Over the weekend, the neighborhood felt different, not just quieter, watchful. The same people who once nodded politely but said little now spoke freely. I heard stories from residents I barely knew: intimidation over garden gnomes, threats for not power-washing driveways, one man who'd been fined for excessive pet noise despite living alone. On Sunday, I hosted a cookout not to celebrate, but to listen. I set out folding chairs in my yard and people came. Jamie brought a projector and played the drone footage again for those who hadn't seen it. Lydia explained the environmental violations in plain terms. Toby passed around copies of the audit filing. That night, we voted unofficially just among ourselves. A show of hands. Who wanted the board gone? Every hand went up. Monday morning, the fallout began. The treasurer resigned first, citing health reasons. Then the secretary vanished from the group email list. By Wednesday, Karren herself posted a farewell message on the HOA website, full of vague language about moving on to new challenges and prioritizing personal wellness. But it wasn't over yet. 2 weeks later, I got a subpoena to appear before the county grand jury. The environmental violations had triggered a broader investigation that uncovered falsified maintenance records, embezzlement of reserve funds, and undisclosed contractor kickbacks. Karren and 2 others were named in the indictment. The grand jury proceedings took a full day. I testified about the race, the letter, the buried box, and the unauthorized drainage system. I presented the drone footage, the waivers, and the HOA's own bylaws. Each time a juror asked a question, I answered with calm clarity. I wasn't angry anymore, just focused. By the end of the week, the county issued charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, environmental negligence, and misuse of community funds. Karren was arrested at her sister's house in the next county over. The council meeting the following month was packed. Cameras, reporters, neighbors seated shoulder to shoulder. I took the podium and laid out everything: how it started with a boat, how it grew into something bigger than me, how it showed that a few signatures on a clipboard don't make someone untouchable. The council voted unanimously to dissolve the current HOA board and appoint a temporary trustee panel, 5 residents chosen by random lot to oversee operations until a new election could be held. I wasn't one of them. I didn't want the job. I'd done what I needed to do. The lake is quiet now, except on weekends when kids splash near the shore and the occasional paddleboarder glides past the reeds. My boat sits where it always has, beside the garage, untouched and unbothered. No more fines, no more threats. Just water, sky, and a neighborhood that finally remembered who it belonged to. The new trustee panel wasted no time. By the following Monday, a notice went out that a full forensic audit was underway. Every resident received a sealed envelope with a survey asking for input on how the HOA had impacted their quality of life. The language was careful, but the message was clear. The era of arbitrary control was over. I didn't expect to hear from Councilwoman Dana Rivas again, but she called the next day. "There's something else," she said. "You remember the maintenance contracts your HOA used for landscaping and lake upkeep?" "Sure. They always hired that same guy in the green truck. Never talked to anyone. His business license was revoked 2 years ago, and the checks kept flowing to his LLC. We think someone was routing payments through a shell company." I paused. "You think Karren was laundering funds through a fake contractor, possibly, or someone close to her?" "We're pulling bank records now." That night, I pulled out my old laptop and started digging through the neighborhood Facebook group archives. It took about an hour, but I found it. A post from 3 years earlier where a new resident had asked if they could use their own landscaper. Karren's response had been firm: all lawn care must be coordinated through the HOA's approved vendor for uniformity. A few comments down, someone had asked for the vendor's name. Karren had simply replied, "Handled through HOA admin." I took screenshots and emailed them to Dana. The next week, detectives from the State Financial Crimes Division showed up with a search warrant. This time, they weren't just looking for misplaced receipts. They seized the HOA's office desktop, a backup hard drive, and a filing cabinet from the clubhouse's locked storage room. One of the agents carried out a small safe under his arm. News traveled fast. By Wednesday, the local paper ran a front-page story. HOA embezzlement probe expands shell company linked to former board president. The article named Karren Albridge as a person of interest in a growing fraud investigation, citing evidence that over $60,000 had been paid to a non-existent vendor. I was at the hardware store when I got the call from Marissa. They found a second account under a different name. Karren used her niece's address to register it. All those payments went into that account. Any charges yet? They're filing for wire fraud, falsification of records, and misuse of community funds. Possibly mail fraud too, depending on how the checks were routed. By Friday, the sheriff's office confirmed the arrest. Karren was picked up at a cafe 2 towns over. She didn't resist. No sunglasses this time, no clipboard, just a windbreaker and a tight-lipped stare as she was led into the back of the cruiser. The trustee panel held an emergency town hall the next day. I wasn't planning to speak, but when they opened the floor, a dozen hands shot up. People were tired of being silent. An older gentleman named Roy stepped up first. "Last year, I got fined for leaving my trash bin out past pickup day. I was in the hospital, they knew it. Still charged me $100. A mother of 3 followed him. They told me I couldn't put up a swing set because it would disrupt the visual harmony. My kids cried for a week. By the time I spoke, the room had already shifted. No more fear, no more silence. I never wanted to start a fight, I said. I just wanted to park my boat. But when I saw how deep it went, the lies, the threats, it stopped being about a driveway. This place doesn't belong to a few people with forms and fines. It belongs to all of us." The audience stood when the trustees announced that every fine issued by the previous board was temporarily suspended pending review. Refunds would be issued where appropriate. The HOA's enforcement authority would be subject to community approval going forward, with any new rule changes requiring a 2/3 vote. That evening, I got a knock at my door. It was Deputy Langston. "Thought you'd want to know," he said. "They're adding charges." Looks like Karren forged signatures on several checks. She also filed a false insurance claim after staging vandalism at the clubhouse during that storm last summer. Any prison time on the table, DA's pushing for it. Could be 5 to 7 years, possibly more if they tie in the environmental damage. I leaned against the doorframe. I always figured she'd trip herself up eventually. I just didn't think it'd be over my boat. Langston gave a short laugh. Well, sometimes justice comes in waves. Over the next month, the neighborhood changed, not overnight but noticeably. Fences that once had warning signs now had welcome signs. The clubhouse, once locked except for board meetings, reopened for game nights and yoga classes. Kids rode scooters past houses that used to be silent behind closed blinds. For the first time in years, people were smiling on the sidewalks. The trustee panel hired a new management company locally owned, no hidden fees and transparent contracts. They posted monthly financials on the HOA website, down to the penny. They even sent out paper copies for older residents who didn't use computers. One Saturday, I took the boat out to the lake just to float. Not to fish, not to race, just to sit. A couple of kids waved from the dock. Toby was grilling burgers on the shore, and Lydia sat nearby with a book in her lap. Jamie flew his drone overhead, this time with a camera rig that streamed to the community center's new screen. They'd started hosting outdoor movie nights, and tonight's feature was a slideshow of neighborhood memories. One of the photos was from the jet ski race, me standing at the starting line, clipboard in hand, grinning like I'd just pulled a fast one on the universe. As the sun dipped behind the treetops, I pulled the anchor and let the boat drift. Ripples spread across the water, soft and wide, touching every corner of the lake. Karren's house went up for sale a week later. No one rushed to buy it. People wanted to know who they were moving in next to these days. The trustees invited me to help draft the new charter, a document that would limit board powers, guarantee transparency, and ensure no one could ever hijack the community for personal gain again. I agreed, but only on the condition that everything be voted on openly. No more backroom decisions. When we finalized it, we held a vote on the lake shore. Folding chairs, lemonade, and a big whiteboard with every clause displayed for discussion. It passed unanimously. The HOA still existed, technically, but it was no longer a weapon. It was a tool one the community could use, not one that used them. I didn't host another jet ski race. I didn't need to, but the lake remained open, and the boat stayed in the driveway exactly where it belonged.